Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on the call today. As Sabrina introduced, my name is Scott Frappier. My role at Stoneridge Software is a pre-sales architect. So I focus on taking the latest and greatest technologies that are out there and mapping those into the business process. Experience-wise, I've got around 19 years of experience within Dynamics, and you've probably seen me on some of the internal things that we do, such as Confab and other webinars. And basically, I just love technology. Ron, did you want to do a quick introduction as well?
Sure, thanks. My name is Ron Root. I'm the Enterprise Sales Director at Stoneridge Software. I've been with the company for about 3 years, but I've been working in the Microsoft space now for a better part of, well, actually more than 25 years. Primarily working with solutions, previously the Navision solution, and now AX and the upgrade to FinOps. So I'm pleased to be on the call today.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron. So today, guys, what we're trying to do with a webinar format, obviously, is to try to convey as much information as possible for you so that you can take this webinar, view it in the future, but basically kind of go over our central topic today, right? Upgrading from AX to Dynamics 365. And a lot of you I met actually at the Summit event, and a lot of you had just questions around it, right? I mean, there's a lot of customers and prospects that we have that are looking at migrating from AX 2009 or even AX 2012 to the new version, which has some changes with it. And what we want to do today is just arm you with some more information on what you should be doing and what is the value of this process. I come from, like I said, if 19 years of experience now. I come from the on-prem era, right? I mean, where we had things that we deploy and we would not update it, and from there we just let it sit, and if it wasn't broke, we didn't fix it, right? So those mentalities are shifting nowadays as well. We need to start talking about what are those drivers as we go through this process. So today for an agenda, I'm going to build out the slides so we can just talk about the core concepts here. Obviously, let's talk a little bit about the latest news, because I think that might influence some of your decisions in terms of when and how you want to do an upgrade. Because features classically inside of ERP systems, if you've worked with Bond or if you've worked with older solutions, you'll know that a sales order process is a sales order process, right? But when we start looking at some of the advanced features now that are coming into ERP systems, these are concepts that have not been in older systems. So we want to talk about what are those new features that could help drive business growth and also help support the business as we go through this. When we talk about technology from our perspective, and I think Ron would agree with this, we look at technology as a tool. It's not an ends all to meet all of your requirements. It's more about being able to help assist with the business to drive that growth. So what we want to do is cover what's new. We want to talk about why would we upgrade? Is it worth it, right? And what do you need to do to prepare your team, and what are some of the cost considerations as well that we need to do as part of this? Ron, I don't know if you had anything else to add in here for the agenda, but wanted to check
No, I
with you.
think you touched on it. I think one of the key points that I see in moving to this to the D365 solution is really to start taking benefiting from some of the new platform innovations, and I think you'll be
Mhm.
able to leverage those more. We can talk about those more specifically. You know, the common data model and how we're leveraging that with the D365 and CRM and Office 365, and also some of the Power Apps that allow you to create a lot of new tools and uh, innovations, things that will allow you to do things that you weren't traditionally able to do in an on-prem environment.
Yeah, because we're moving more now towards, and this is, I'm sure some of you have heard this in the past. I mean, the latest and greatest is always like, oh, what's this new feature, right? And it's like, well, you've got to look at it with a healthy dose of skepticism sometimes as well. The point here is that we actually are looking at technology that's pretty agnostic from your process, meaning that we have multiple components that we can use to help with your IT and your business process strategy, instead of trying to put one system that does everything, we have components that are related to it. So we're going to talk, like Ron said, the common data model is really integral for that, especially the common data service portion of that. So we're going to talk more about that today as well, just to give you, these are some of the huge advantages that we're looking at within ERP that is fundamentally culturally different as well from our competitors. And that's a really important thing to note, is that we're really going down a path that we started. And initially, there was a little bit of doubt with it, but now we're starting to see that traction. We can talk about some of those success stories as well. But the latest and greatest, just to kind of go through this. So October 2019, as many of you probably already know, Microsoft is releasing waves of features into the Dynamics 365 products. And typically, they do this every April and every October of every year. And they call it Wave 1 and Wave 2, that they push out this new functionality into the application. And the functionality could be specific new business process functionality. It could be platform updates. It could be integration aspects with it. And it covers more than just finance and supply chain management. And that's the big thing that happened this year. With the October 2019 release, there was a big shift in how finance and operations worked, or AX in the past obviously works, meaning that we now have two separate applications that are introduced because some customers need just supply chain management because they already have a financial system. Some customers only need a financial system because they don't need supply chain management. And so what Microsoft did is they branched both of those specific applications into two separate apps. And that's one thing you're going to notice here as we go through this conversation, is that we're looking at components of ERP functionality being split up into these separate applications so that you can mix and match these technologies as your business grows and as your business requirements potentially change. So the big one here, though, obviously, is that finance and supply chain management now are two different products. So when you're looking at upgrading from AX to finance and supply chain management, there's got to be a discovery done on who are your finance only users and who are your supply chain management users. And obviously we can help through that as well. The other aspect that's kind of important here is some of the new product functionality that they're introducing. So obviously with the, I think it was 2012 R3, we introduced the wax and tracks functionality. Well, now we've got EAM capabilities, so the enterprise asset management capabilities that have been added. And the really great thing about this is that if you're a manufacturer, this is a pretty huge thing, meaning that you have machines that may require downtime when you're going through the production process, and you need to schedule that, and you need to take that value of that work and then add it to the asset, for example, for the depreciation expense that's going to occur. This is a huge feature that's been integrated into the solution, and Microsoft actually purchased an existing solution that was out, a third-party solution that was out there, and then integrated it into the base code, very similar to what they did with the wax and tracks. So that's a really huge feature there. And then lastly, there's been a lot of supply chain management updates. With the splitting of the application, obviously, they really need to focus on making this the best supply chain management solution if a company is just looking at using SCM, for example. So, integration with catch weight, extending that to the manufacturing process, wave visualization so that you can actually see how waves are actually being produced as part of the process. They've gone through and really polished off that warehouse management capability to handle a lot more of the scenarios that more complex distribution environments really require as we go through that. And then what I also wanted to do is just show the last time we talked about this was kind of the last upgrade that we looked at with this, and it still resonates even today with what our content is. More specifically, in October, we were trying to get everyone that was on, for example, F&O at the time, to a single version so that all these realized updates could be applied to the environments. And that's been a resounding success in my mind with this, meaning that we have a lot of customers that were able to get to that upgrade, and Microsoft has been able to then push these updates to their platform without disrupting the business. And with ERP, obviously, that's a really fundamental aspect inside of here that we're also going to talk about a little bit more. Is that when you have changes that are being implemented, you really don't want to cause downtime conditions, obviously, as part of that process. Ron, I know we had a couple of customers that have gone through this, and I know you've talked to them too. Overall, though, like I said, I think it's gone pretty well, right?
Yeah, it has. It's not like as though there aren't certain hiccups when you go through these, and
Yep.
just people have to learn from. It's a new UI for a lot of them. But there's a lot of enhancements to it as well, and I think there's just a lot of things that make the product a lot more predictable and intuitive than it was in the past.
Yep. I'd agree with that. So let's talk a little bit about that then too. So one of the key things to note here is that when you're looking at upgrading, and we're establishing some of the facts, right? Because is it worth it is subjective. It's per business basically that needs to be able to identify that. But a key component here is an architectural change that we have on the platform. So there's a couple of things that are really important here. So first off, we're moving to an extension-based system. In prior versions, in AX, obviously, you could take a object and overlay it, and then you had different, user, you had ISV, you had all these layers, and the basically the importance of those layers that would then override code. So if you made a customization in the user layer, that would override all the other layers, but it would inherit all the characteristics of all the layers into that one layer, for example. With extensions, you're not replacing an entire object. You're basically integrating with a specific event, and it's a subscription type event where that, for example, when a customer gets inserted, it fires off an event, and then your code picks up that event and then does something with it. So you're not changing the base code anymore, or you're not able to change the base code as well, which is important. You're adding on to it and extending it to handle those scenarios. So obviously, in terms of your minds, if you're a developer on this call, that's a shift that you're going to have to look at with that. The other aspect of this is that the extension-based model allows for us to do more frequent updates because now as we deploy, for example, a new environment or an upgrade of an environment, as we install an extension, Microsoft can basically tell us what different events have been deprecated or changed or removed with that. So obviously this helps with the more frequent updates that are needed. The other aspect of this is that we're moving away from just a type of environment that you as a end user need to pay a partner to make customizations to. That's always been the classical ERP model, is that you would have a partner that you would pay for changes to it, and from there you would make those changes, and you didn't have as much control over that, or you had to buy a developer license, or you have to buy specific granules to be able to access that. We're moving away from that within our environments, meaning that we're trying to go towards a more of an end user type development platform that you've probably heard as low and no code applications that are out there, basically formula based apps. And if you think about it, if you know how to do Excel, you can create applications, which is a pretty cool feature. Then obviously we've got new tools for the regression testing that we use through this to ensure then that code is transitioning properly as we go through our architectural changes. So with this architecture, there's even newer features that they're looking at in the future as well that are going to help with the scalability, zero downtime for upgrades, for example. There's all these different things that they're introducing that we're going to start seeing in, for example, the April 2020 update that they're working on as well at this point. And then another important thing here too is that the release note visibility. This is, in my mind, huge. And initially when it first came out, I was actually a little bit shocked that Microsoft would do this because it's not something that classically I've seen from other vendors or partners in the past, where they're delivering the actual visibility for new features and application level enhancements before the product release in a regular schedule now. So an example is that we had, and that's a typo up here, but it's the October 18 release notes that were delivered, and you can go look at them if you go to the link at the top here to see that information. They delivered a 19 or April 19th and an October 19th, and they're already working on the April 20 content as well with this. But this documents all the new features that you can access without having to purchase the software, which is, in my mind, a really powerful capability of information to help you understand what is the path of Microsoft and what are they tackling as part of that. Ron, I know I look at them, I mean, they're usually 2 to 3 months before the actual delivery of the product. I look at them 2 to 3 months ahead of time just to understand what's going on in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the key takeaways from this as well is to really understand that in the new platform, the new environment of D365, you're going to see, again, a much more consistent product. It's not going to be tweaked and customized like you've traditionally done in the past. So you're going to have a platform that's, Microsoft's going to be sending out platform updates about every 2 to 3 months. And then twice a year, they're going to send out application updates that would include a lot of the, the functionality that you'll see here represented in these documents. I think that's really critical to understand, because what it really means is that your system will never have to go through those traditional type of upgrades that you've had to do in the past. You got a product that's going to be consistent. The other value too is if you look at it even for those of you that might participate in user groups, oftentimes, one company might be on an older version of AX, maybe 2012 release 2, another one was on, it might be on release 3, but they had a lot of customizations that would influence the way the product would behave. This software now, because the way this is being presented by Microsoft, you're no longer touching the core code, so you're gonna have a consistent product throughout. All the benefits of those new platform technologies, like those or those applications or power apps that you can actually put on to enhance the product, those go on top, again, using extensions, so you're not impacting the core code, and I think that's a huge advantage moving forward.
Yeah, it's absolutely huge. I 100% agree. And then kind of the other aspect here, the carrot or the stick, right? I mean, this is one that we've used as an analogy that maybe doesn't have as much relevance right now, because a lot of you hopefully are on finance and operations and you understand the value of the upgrade that you've done as well. But obviously when we're doing a presentation, it's always the carrot or the stick concept that we're having here, right? We're showing all these cool features and it's like, well, how do I get to this? Like, or is it really that good? Is the carrot really that good as part of this versus the stick? And so what we want to do here is just kind of frame for the next content, what should you be thinking about that you need to be able to tackle as part of your upgrade strategy and plan? And one of the first topics that I typically bring up is going to be your support lifecycle. And this is, I am an anti-fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or the FUD marketing concept. I know it exists. I just think that people, they have different reasons for different decisions that they need to make as part of it. But the key thing to note here is that if we start looking at products that have mainstream support, and with support life cycles within Microsoft, there's different ratings of mainstream, extended, that you basically sign up for or that you're supported with, and it affects how you get your security updates and things of that nature, and also how we can interact with Microsoft from that perspective too. So an example would be, let's say AX 2012 R2, you can see that mainstream support has expired. So there's an extended support option that we have as well that limits us in terms of what we can get from Microsoft, basically. But the key thing to note here is that, for example, with AX 2009, let's go to that one. We have mainstream support that's expired and we have extended support that's expired as well. Let's say that you need to upgrade one of your servers to Windows Server 2016. And you need us to install AX 2009 AOS on that particular server. Well, if it doesn't start for some reason, there's no path that we have to go to be able to fix that potential issue, because it's out of that mainstream and extended support options for us, which means then that we'd have to upgrade to be able to do that. So what you're doing is that you're putting your technology then potentially on an older platform that you can't support, and the documentation on that older platform. I don't know if many of you have tried looking up Windows XP information on the web. It seems that a lot of that information is starting to go away. So obviously the support lifecycle perspective, you really need to consider, and you really need to start planning off of it. If you're on 2012 R2 right now, we have some extended support options that cover some of the security updates that are related to it. But if there's a groundbreaking platform update, we're not going to be able to get that update and apply it towards R2 because it does not part of that mainstream support lifecycle. And the same goes with R3 right now. So if you're on 2012 R3, your mainstream support ends in October 2021. So we're looking at 2 years at this point of support before we finally no longer support that potential version from a mainstream support perspective. So we're going to want to start having these conversations with our customers up front on the upgrade. And it's not like we're not going to support you. I mean, if we run into an issue, our team is very tenacious. It's one of our core values. We're going to help you get through the problem. But at the same point, the realism with it is if it's a problem that requires Microsoft because it's executable layer code that we have no access to, and we don't have a different strategy to tackle it, it's something that does put your environment at a risk. So a couple things that you can help with that is, virtualize as much as possible, keep those machines hardened as much as possible as well, the older versions especially, so only certain ports are open for that communication. Be cautious on updates that you apply towards those machines. Anything that you can reduce and harden then that environment will help you as you go through this life cycle, because obviously the transition is going to take some time as well as we go through it. And I did document, kind of the updates here for it as well, so that you guys know. We'll have this slide deck available for you to be able to access afterwards about the differences between mainstream support, extended support, and no support options with it as well. And the one thing that's really key here is the fixes for non-security issues are still being released. So new features that were added, new versions of SQL Server, for example, certification with that particular SQL Server. That's considered a new feature. When you actually use it on a newer database platform, for example, that would cause it to be a new feature. So those are the big differences, and this doesn't apply as much towards the finance and supply chain management in the future now. This is for you that are on AX 2012 or AX 2009 and need to look at the upgrade path with it. Know that there's some support options that we have, but not inclusive basically till the end of time. The other aspect here then too, the feedback loop. So now when we start talking about, we've gone through, your existing environment. The other aspect here is what are we looking at now when we're looking at finance and supply chain management? Meaning it's no longer something that Microsoft is saying, okay, let's develop this one monolithic application that you connect to, that handles your service management, that handles your talent capabilities. Let's make it so that we have technologies that center around data and intelligence. And that is the huge cultural shift that we want to communicate on this webinar today, is that we are moving more away from an application that does it all to data that is centralized with applications that are more specific towards the business process or functional area that you're trying to integrate with. And what Microsoft has called this is, it's called the digital feedback loop, because you've got engagement, you've got optimization, you've got transformation and empowerment that is all occurring as part of your ERP rollout, or your business systems rollout is what we're more commonly calling it. So when you start looking at your AX 2012 upgrade, I know it's really hard to shift your mentality from this is AX to more of This is Dynamics 365, kind of like Office. We've got specific point case applications, Excel, Word, so on and so forth, but I can take a Excel document and paste it into Word, or I can use PowerPoint and take the content from different pictures inside of Word and paste them into PowerPoint. So there's a lot of change that's occurring with that. And more specifically here, if we go over to kind of the Dynamics 365 slide, remember that each of these particular areas are applications then that we can add into the solution. And this is an older slide, but it still resonates, meaning that we have project service automation, we've got finance and supply chain management, we've got Power BI, we've got AppSource, we've got Office 365. I mean, it's no longer where we're trying to develop one, like I said, monolithic application. We're trying to create applications that you can integrate with and then use that functionality, so that way you can really have the best business processes tackled by the right technology for that matter. So it's a really important thing to note as we go through this. Now, the other aspect of this, just to kind of talk through, is just the intelligence aspect with it. And this is where we start looking then at, what are the actual applications that are part of Dynamics 365 now. So we're going beyond then just, AX, right? We're looking at, for example, Office 365. It's really awesome because we can actually, inside of finance and supply chain management, we can click on a button and export any form to Excel. And we had that in the past as well, but now we actually have the edit capability as well. So that way, if you want to make a mass update or change with it, we have that capability built in. We have Flow, or what was just rebranded as Power Automate, that allows you to have events so that when a customer record is updated, it will actually go through and then do an action, send an email, post to LinkedIn, post to Twitter, whatever you want it to do. But we can have then those if this, then this type applications process as part of that. And then we have Power Apps and Power BI, which are integral to the strategy of Dynamics, because we're looking at now moving away from having us do development or developing just inside of finance and supply chain management, but making applications that are designed by end users, that are for end users, that are deployable across the enterprise within multiple Dynamics 365 systems. And so obviously a lot of that comes then with, the common data service and Azure and things of that nature. Those are huge concepts that we'll talk a little bit more about as we go through this. But it's really important just to put on the table is that when we start saying, is it worth it? You can't just say, is it worth it from AX's perspective, because all these other technologies are coming with this and are part of it. And many of them are part of the licensing model as well. Meaning that, for example, if you want to use Power BI inside of finance and supply chain management, you don't have to buy a Power BI license. You can use Power BI as it is right now to tackle that. And Power Apps, for example, it's part of the licensing model that we have. So it's not an additional upcharge that we're looking for this. It's more of additional services to help you manage your data to really drive that. And then, here's the carrots, right? So we've talked a little bit about that, but the modern experience, the integration into cloud, the hosting on Azure, security, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk through some of these concepts to really understand that. And Ron, I think you put this slide in here. Who is that that wonderful gentleman that's on here that is showing the carrot to the rabbit?
Is this your attempt to point out the age difference that we have?
It
Yeah,
could
that
be,
would be
maybe.
Captain Kangaroo. So
That's
that's an old one for sure.
That's awesome. I have not seen that. That would be good to watch. So a couple things here then. So Power BI. We start talking about, what are the new features that you should be looking at with it. So if you have not used Power BI, I would highly recommend after this webinar that you go online to www.powerbi.com, sign up for a Power BI subscription, and then just start experimenting with it. I use it in every single software demonstration. We run our business. Stoneridge Software runs its business by using Power BI. And Power BI is an analytical tool that allows for you to interact with your data and really create reports and key performance indicators that are basically like Excel. If you know how to do a pivot chart, for example, you would be able to create Power BI visuals, and those Power BI visuals can also integrate inside of Dynamics 365. Ron, I know that we demo this a lot, and I think it's rare that we are now going into prospect sites or even existing customer sites and they've not heard of this, right?
No, you're absolutely right. And the fact that it's available to the customer at no additional charge, I think is really valuable. The thing again, the key takeaway here is Power BI is a visualization tool. And that's what I think what a lot of people are really hungry for. They don't want to just see the raw data. They want to see it in charts. They want to
Yeah.
see, something that's going to give them a lot more visibility. It's a lot more intuitive than trying to review and dig through a minefield of data.
Yeah, that's a really important topic because culturally, I mean, you look at the shift of reporting. It used to be you run a big report and then you look through that report and then you highlight the exceptions, right? Is what you used to do as part of your reporting process. Then came, export to Excel in a lot of reports. So you could at least put it in Excel to be able to manage that data. Now, as Ron stated, it's more visualization and interaction with it. It still has details, like you can still do tables and get to that detail and export that data to Excel, but the visualization component makes it really easy to ask questions. Or for example, if you click on a specific product, it'll just show that product's information versus all of the others without you having to create a brand new report to integrate with those metrics. So it's a really capable and powerful capability that is we're seeing our customers really leverage. The other aspect that's important here too, so that's one really powerful, why is it worth the upgrade, is just Power BI by itself, and the integration it has within Dynamics is pretty powerful. The other aspect though is Azure. And so, this is one that's becoming even more prominent as time goes on, meaning that Microsoft has what they call three clouds that they typically talk to: Dynamics 365, Office 365, and Azure. And of those, the Dynamics cloud is actually considered the smaller of the three clouds. But people that are using Dynamics, for example, use a lot of Azure. There's a lot of what they call Azure consumption with that. And with Azure, there are extended capabilities that you can add to that are more of that cutting edge. And I wouldn't say there's even bleeding edge concepts that are there. Some of those, like for example, machine learning. We're going to talk about that just a little bit as well. But it really provides additional tools for you to leverage to be able to tackle business problems. And with Azure, as many of you know, and a very simple example would be, let's say you're having a performance centric issue in your environment, and you need to scale that up. Well, if you have it on-prem, for example, you'd have to ensure that you can resize your VM. You have to make sure you have the right type of software to do that, with Hyper-V or VMware and the scaling capabilities. And then you have to make sure you have the right hardware that can scale that out. Whereas when we start talking about Azure, we're talking about, more than $15 billion in cloud infrastructure that Microsoft has created, over 100 data centers serving 140 countries, and 85% of the Fortune 500 customers are on Azure. I mean, it is designed to scale. So when you come to us about a performance issue, one of the things that we can do is we can throw additional hardware at it, whereas before that was not something that we could do with it. And that might be a temporary solution, or maybe it actually is the real solution, meaning that transaction volume, everything is optimized, but we just need more hardware to be able to tackle that. So the Azure cloud is a very important aspect to consider as part of your upgrade process. The
Scott, let
other,
me let
yeah,
me add a couple
absolutely.
of things about that. Oh, you're going to bring up the security piece of this
Yeah,
as well.
yeah,
That was
yep,
actually one of the points I was going to make.
yep.
But I think the other thing, we'll talk about the security piece. I know a lot of people are still, a bit guarded about moving from on-prem to a cloud environment. And I think some people still think that, my data is safer, it's more secure if it's locked in a closet somewhere at our office or in a facility that we own. I think at this point you're starting to see a lot of information and statistics that really support the fact that your data is not more secure in that environment. In fact, I would argue that Moving to a cloud environment, and specifically the Azure cloud environment, takes a lot of the security concerns that you have off the table. They have over 2,000 cybersecurity professionals working 24/7, 365 to ensure that your data is in fact secure. So I think they've done a really good job of really developing those environments. That platform that gives you that security. The other
Yep.
piece of this that I was going to mention, as you touched on, is when you start looking at all the raw data that is out there, and people want to start to consume that data, that big data that they talk about now, we're taking that information in. In the past, you haven't been able to really capture all of that data for a couple of different reasons, but one of the big ones was even if we had the data, we just didn't have the infrastructure to consume it. We didn't have the horsepower behind it to be able to take that data and really crank it out and make something meaningful of it. And I think that's another reason why in a Azure environment or moving to the cloud platform, that scalability is going to be huge.
And it starts getting to the more predictive aspect of this. So you've heard this, it's real now, meaning data lakes. It's kind of funny, everything has to deal with cloud, raining, and lakes lately, which is kind of interesting. But the point is that when we start looking at advanced analytics with machine learning, and all machine learning is it's a pattern matching algorithm, right? That's basically trying to identify future events that could occur as part of the past information that we have. A lot of those types of technologies around machine learning are looking at using Azure to do it because the horsepower requirement to be able to build these neural networks, as we call them, is quite a bit. I mean, it takes a lot of processing power to do that. But once it's been trained, it's a very accurate prediction of kind of the future. It's called predicting the future is what we talk about with that concept. And truly what it is it's a computer algorithm that's found patterns to be able to identify then what the future could happen with it with a higher degree of accuracy than classical, mathematical models that are there. So, and like Ron said as well, when we start looking at security here, I mean, that's a really important thing. And not to, once again, I don't believe in FUD, but the information needs to come out with this, meaning, it's not really about somebody infiltrating externally, meaning that they're trying to scan your firewall and logging in and hacking a password and doing all that kind of stuff. It's more that we've seen of the internal attack that occurs. Employees, that's obviously a very common one, but let's go beyond that even. We've had 2 customers recently that have had an event occur where they had somebody open an email. They didn't have their infrastructure requirements or best practices followed for administrative logins, for example, or an IT professional opened it up not knowing for some reason that it was malware, for example. And what happened is that it actually went through the domain and then encrypted everything, and it was ransomware basically. So you have to look at things beyond just the intrusion and somebody scanning something to get your data. It's your employees just opening an email that they look as harmless that installs malware that replicates into ransomware, and then because it's on-prem, for example, at your server, it's going to encrypt that database, and you need to then pay that ransomware for it. And that's become much more common in the world. There are cities, there's news articles about cities, entire city municipalities that are being brought down because they don't have, I'd say, the right security infrastructure in place in the first place, but one wrong move causes this. And when we start looking at cloud, we start mitigating that because Microsoft is on top of this, like Ron said, with over 3,500 cybersecurity professionals. There's a big focus on making sure that this infrastructure is secure and that we have resiliency for it as well in terms of that redundancy. The other aspect here, just to kind of note, is that the Power Apps Flow and Common Data Service. I mean, if there's one feature that I would say in the future is going to be a game changer for you when you start looking at saying, is it worth it? It would be these technologies. And Flow is actually, like I said, it's been relabeled as Power Automate. And the Common Data Service is really important too. Just high level here because we're talking about the upgrade pattern with this. The Common Data Service is a way that you can store your enterprise level data in one database that can be accessed through many different applications. So you can imagine the Common Data Service as a database that lives up in the cloud that has all of these different entities that are inside of it, or tables, such as your account table or your sales order table or your inventory table or your item table. All these tables then are updated through different applications. So supply chain management, for example, when you create a new product, that product would then exist inside of your Common Data Service database. If you have a sales order that comes inside of finance or inside of supply chain management, and you want to see that sales order inside of Dynamics 365 CE, or what we call customer engagement, or formerly known as CRM, you would see it because it's in the Common Data Service. So this is something that really is in my mind, a huge game changer long term, because what you can do is you can now create applications that access one repository of information, that updates one repository, that you integrate to with one repository, that then replicates across all the different Dynamics 365 and even third-party applications that are out there. And the intent that Microsoft is doing is that they've created this one common data service that uses what we call the common data model, which is, a bunch of tables that are inside of there. Well, then what can happen here is that you can use Power Apps and Power Automate and Power BI to do reporting off of this, or to create new applications that are designed as end user based applications. So the couple of examples that I've been with prospects with this recently, just real world examples. So this one company has basically a salvage yard operation, and what they've done is they've gone through and they've created an application that allows for them to look up a specific make, model of a particular product. We'll say, either a car or a tractor or whatever it is. And they created an application using C#, C++, whatever it is, the old classical model in terms of programming. And anytime there's an update, IT has to update that and do all those changes with it. Well, we showed a concept of a Power App being able to do this, where it's looking at the inventory inside of Dynamics 365. It's an application that an end user could develop, and it tackles the same business case scenarios that they need, that they're more expensive and more complex, full code application was created off of. And in ours, there's no code that was created. It's just formulas that really tackle that. So this is something that then, after we had that conversation, our prospect and our customers are like, well, geez, we could create a budget application. We could create a portal application. We could create a internal application that can be on a phone that somebody can look up customer information or check in or check out on certain processes. These are all end user based applications that then update Dynamics 365 because they integrate them with the Common Data Service. So this is, like I said, in my mind, a game changer. And Ron, I know we've had lots of conversations around this lately, and it seems to be getting a lot more traction, right?
Yeah, I like to think of all of this as really, and I think what Microsoft is really modeling this as is the Power Platform. So, and I think underneath all of that is your Power Apps, which might include, applications that have already been developed that are out there that you can purchase. But then there's also things you can use, Canvas apps and model apps and reporting apps to create all of these, new environments and tools that you can leverage. But also, Flow, which is now Power Automate, the Common Data Service. Ultimately, what it's really doing is it's centralizing all of that data, and it really improves the productivity, but it also the transparency across the entire organization and across all those apps in a very safe, secure environment. And again, I think that's one of the tenets that Microsoft is really moving towards, is we want to try to encourage everybody to leverage the tools that they have in place today, rather than all these different silos of data. Let's leverage them all into one database that gives them, I think, all of that transparency and the ability that they've been looking for to really create and do things more productively with that data.
Yep, absolutely. And I know we're getting close on time here, so what I want to do is I want to go through a couple of the other areas too with this task recorder. Obviously, we have that in 2012 R3, but now we have visualization with task recordings that give us playback capabilities. So that way, if you want to document, as you can see, for example, the click new action right here, this is a person stepping through this particular task recording, and it'll actually show you where to go as part of that process. So this is another great feature that's been added to the application that really helps with end user adoption and training as well. We start looking at that overlaying concept. I'm not going to talk about this in a lot of detail. The slide is here for you guys to take a look at. There's a whole new concept that we have around extensions then that make it so that when we start looking at upgrades, we can start really doing upgrades without impacting the business or trying to do a full merge process, because many of you know of the pain from 2009 to 2012, for example, or even 2012 R2 to 2012 R3, and the development effort related to that. They're really trying to get away from that, and they have successfully, in my mind, gotten away from that with the adoption of this extension-based model that you need to start looking at and using, and it helps with your overall cost long term with your ERP system and keeps you current, so you don't get version locked. And that's a very important concept that has changed now as well, and that's another reason why it would be worth upgrading. Other aspects here then too, I want to show just a couple others. Windows mixed reality. So this applies to some customers that may need to use visualizations. Like you can take a tablet, you can hold it up to a machine, and all the metrics on that machine, such as flow rates or if a valve is engaged or not, can be shown. It's not just HoloLens. HoloLens is the more common one that we talk to with it, but at the same point, a lot of the technologies that are out there now allow for you to use that with tablets, basically, with cameras that do that mixed reality capability. So that's something that I don't see as much traction with lately, but depending upon your industry, it can be very powerful. A quick example of that, architects and walking into a room that they've architected, they can see where every single power outlet is going to be by just going ahead and looking around in the room. They can see where lights will be, furniture, things of that nature, to really get to that mixed reality or that augmented reality capability. And then another important thing to note here is that when you start looking at the upgrade lifecycle with this, you're now looking at machine learning and artificial intelligence concepts also being applied to the environment, meaning that if you want to do forecasting with it, that uses demand planning calculations such as ARIMA, seasonality, or exponential smoothing, for example, those algorithms are actually built into Dynamics 365 and then uses Azure ML to do those calculations. Customers that are late payment predictions, for example. So that way you can look at the pattern of what they've done for payments, and you can kind of adjust your cash flow based upon what the artificial intelligence or machine learning capabilities are telling you when that customer will pay, because it's looking at the statistics of that customer. So I don't want to downgrade this. I know we've got just a little bit of time here, but that's a very important aspect of this that's part of it. And the other aspect of it is that, we start looking at any type of device that you can have on. So if you want to use Internet Explorer, hopefully not, but if you did, you wanted to, you could. Microsoft Edge, Chrome, Safari, Firefox, any type of device. So whether it's on a tablet or a phone, the mobility aspects of it, I take it for granted now, but I remember having to RDP in to be able to enter in time, for example, in our time entry system. It was just painful. Whereas now I can just go ahead and just open up an application on my phone and just type a couple things on, and I have that information updated. And the thing about it is it doesn't stop there. I mean, this is an introduction, obviously, for why you should be upgrading. But we've got retail, point of sale, we've got RFQ, vendor collaboration that was added, the enterprise asset management, the catch weights. These are all features that have been added that just make that upgrade life cycle from 2012 or from 2009 even more appealing, because it tackles a lot of these types of features. So a couple last things I just want to cover here is obviously some cost considerations that you need to think about as we go through this process as well. Meaning that, the current version of AX that you're on is going to impact that cost. The scope of the processes that you use affects that cost. The degree of changes that you've done to those processes affect it. The new scope that you want to introduce, the existing customizations, these are all areas that you should really be considering as part of your upgrade plan. And they're topics that we can absolutely talk to you about and assist you with to be able to really drive that. And a couple of the things to note too is that the licensing changes are a big part of this as well. So obviously there's a transition to subscription licensing. And as of October 2019, with Wave 2 being released, there's a new licensing change that Microsoft introduced on what we call the base and attached licenses that you need to talk through with your partner or with us to be able to drive that. You need to know the differences between CSP and EA pricing. That's a really important one that we tackle pretty commonly as part of our conversation with prospects and existing customers that are looking at upgrading or implementing the solution. And what we really recommend through all this is make sure that just do an audit. Understand the end users, how they're being used, whether or not a device license could be used across all these users, meaning that maybe they're using a warehouse management scanner and that needs to be a device license instead of a full user license. There's a lot of detail and nuances with that. So like we said, we really recommend an audit where we can come in as part of either our enterprise process review, as we call it EPR, or we recommend that you at least just take time to go through that licensing, because remember, the model changed from concurrent to named users, and there's different levels of named users as we go through that. And then a couple other things for the scoping of it, obviously. What are you doing inside of AX, and what are you identifying for what needs to have improvement with it? And what are you going to do in terms of that code cleanup and code review with it? Meaning that as part of the upgrade lifecycle now, you should be looking at what you want to keep or what you don't want to keep. Meaning you may not want to transition every single report that you have into the cloud concept. Instead, maybe you just want to make sure that you've got these 10 main reports that you used, and during implementation, even though you created 50 of them, you're not going to use those, or you can use Power BI to tackle those. Those are different types of scoping changes that you can do to really minimize that cost impact that you have as part of your upgrade lifecycle. And some of the best practices that we recommend, so this is more developer focused, and I just want to highlight that as we go through this, is that you should be looking at, for example, running the best practice error identifier. So that way we can understand what are the best practices for code, because as part of those transition tools that we have, we want to make sure that we're following best practices to automate that upgrade of those particular objects, for example, in a very fast and efficient manner. You should be using form templates, because if you think about it, if you create a list page and you used a form template inside of AX 2012, basically as part of the upgrade, that form template should transition into the new template that we use for our pages. So obviously using form templates is a really critical thing. So go through your objects and make sure that they are following the form template design patterns. Make sure that you're doing the form style checker to ensure that those styles are accurate as you go through it. And then the other aspect of this is making sure that you do code cleanup too. And so this is one that David Bull likes to say. Remember, as part of the upgrade process, you're going to want to schedule a code freeze. So that way we can actually go through and ensure then that the changes that we're capturing as part of the upgrade lifecycle are really tackled. And some of the few capabilities with this, or the one layer and fewer models that we look at with this, is that we're looking at less models. So if you reduce the number of models that you have into one layer, it allows for us to very easily go through and do that particular upgrade. So if you have user code, you should be merging that, obviously, or getting rid of that. You should merge all your code to the cus layer or var layer if you're on AX 2012 at this point, or even 2009. And with that, obviously, we have DevOps integration that really helps with that. And the reduction of the number of models that we have really assists with that upgrade lifecycle. And then finally, what not to keep. And that needs to be part of your strategy as well. Meaning that if there's a new feature that's inside of Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain Management, you probably want to use that standard feature instead of a customization that you may have created. So you should go through those release notes that we documented in this presentation to review that. If you're not using a modification, why bring it over? That's just additional cost to go through that upgrade life cycle. And there's also other aspects too, meaning what can't be coded inside of Dynamics 365. This is, for some customers, they're a little shocked with this, but because we can't change core code, if you had core code modifications, that code needs to be reanalyzed and re-architected generally. So that's something to consider, is that if you know you have some really invasive code, you should be documenting that and talking with your partner about that in more detail. And then obviously the one version, remember, updates are automatic now in the background. And so you need to make sure that when you're designing applications around this environment, that they are resilient to those updates. And those are the extensions that we do and the best practices that we follow for coding and creation of objects inside of the environment that really drives that. So, just go beyond, these are the caveats, but remember, is it worth it? I think if you start looking at all the documentation out there and all the new features that are out there, it really does supply a lot more capability than the current platform, and even goes beyond that. And you can look at some of the resources for this. It shows you the deprecated features, for example, from 2012 to the new version, the extensibility, the patterns that you use in forms, and what's new as well. And I'd recommend that you research this information to really help you drive a lot of those types of decisions. So with that, the last part here, we went pretty fast, intentionally, just so you guys could have some information. I wanted to open up the floor for any questions that you guys may have.
Hey, thanks so much, Scott. Thanks, Ron. Go ahead and type those questions into the questions pane. We did have one come in so far. In your opinion, what is the main benefit of moving to the cloud?
That's a really good one. So I think with every customer, it's going to be different. But in my opinion, if I were looking at it from a CTO strategy perspective, from a business system capability, it's the ability to use applications that I could not harness before to address business problems or business requirements. It's not about putting in one application that I have to design and buy everything around to be able to support that environment. It's more about I can implement Dynamics 365. I can upgrade from AX to Dynamics 365. I can then use, for example, Dynamics 365 CE, because we now have a lead management or opportunity management process flow that our business requires. And from there, I know that data, when I create an order, for example, inside of a CE, that order is going to exist inside of AX or finance and supply chain management. And I don't have to create expensive middleware. I know that it's been tested by Microsoft. I mean, there's just a lot of advantages then that I can start using different applications to be able to drive that. And then lastly, because I'm in this new model of these app services that I can use, I can empower my end users to create their own charts and reports, so that there's no longer an IT bottleneck for it. So that way, if they want to create a report that tackles a specific requirement, I may need to ensure that the data model is accurate for them from an IT perspective. But in terms of the visualization, the creation of the report, the drilling down into the details of that, they can use Power BI to be able to really drive that. So it's more of that empowerment now of the end user versus centralizing in IT, which can, as probably a lot of you know, become a bottleneck. And a lot of the newer generation, or the new generation of thought, I should say, is that end users want to be able to control the data and the interaction with that data without having those bottlenecks from IT or from other individuals.
This is Ron. I would actually echo everything that Scott just talked about. It's really about the platform innovations. All of those innovations, I think, being able to really leverage those, I think is going to be a game changer for a lot of companies. Yep. I'd like to say before we end too, that if you have, I know we've gone through a lot of information here today, and if you have questions, we'll happily field those. But I also want to suggest, I know some of you are probably doing this as a first kind of front line to investigate. And if you feel that the material we've gone through today resonates with you, and you want to message that to your executive team, we'd be happy to do one-off presentations of this same material with that group, if you felt that would make sense for them to start to really kind of look at and evaluate and assess whether or not it really does make practical sense to move forward in a new environment.
Yep.
Thank you. What is the average time to move from AX 2012 R3 to Dynamics 365?
I always love the timeline ones, right? I mean, it is really dependent upon what we've talked about in those cost considerations, right? So we've had some upgrades that have gone through within a couple of months, like 3 months, for example, 3 to 6 months. We had others that have been a very long process, meaning a year or more with it. So that one, what I'd really recommend is that we'd have to really understand more about the environment. But a typical range that you're looking at to do an upgrade is probably going to be 6 to 9 months. Ron, I mean, I think, like I
Yeah,
said, it's really dependent, right? But
it
that's
really
that's
is.
more of
Yeah.
that sweet spot, is what I would
It,
call it.
yeah, and just in complete transparency, there are some clients that we are not actually doing an upgrade. It's a full redeployment.
Yep.
And those are those clients that have actually had their product has been heavily customized for one reason or another. And you have to look at this. Does it make sense to try to move that over, or does it make sense to start over and just move the data? And in those particular cases, we're actually doing a full redeployment.